Hey guys, it's Josh. I just want to give a quick update. There are a couple things kind of going on right now with this engine, and the first and foremost is actually that I have a misfire. So I'm going to have to go ahead and take these coil pack covers off, go ahead and pull spark plugs, and take a look at them. I think what's happening is before first fire, a good thing to do, especially when an engine has been sitting for a long time, is you put a cap full of Marvel Mystery Oil in every cylinder. And unfortunately, it's both fortunate but unfortunate. The expensive spark plugs that these engines take from the factory are actually like a laser iridium, but the iridium itself does not flash off deposits the same way that like a copper plug would. So I'm going to go ahead and just throw some copper plugs in it, at least until I can get some stuff blown out of the cylinders pretty good. A lot of the lopey choppiness that you guys have been hearing in some of the videos, especially the running video where I was going down the street here locally, was completely because of a misfire. So that's why I didn't drive very far for very long. I've actually backed my fuel pressure down just a little bit. Once again, I still have a bracket that's going to end up mounting right here, comes up, and then this will actually be flat so it goes underneath the hood a little bit better. And I went ahead and put back the fuel pressure down a little bit to 40 psi. Now, I did get a question about this radiator. It was an LS swap radiator. I don't know if you guys can see. I'll try to get, it actually has a serial number and everything on it. But it is a Mishimoto radiator. The series itself, it's clear that this one has actually been modified before. It only has one spot for a bracket up on top. That's been, the other two places have actually been filled and welded with like a little cap piece. And then I just went ahead and put a cap on. This is where there's another line that goes, I guess to, I'm not really sure what it does, but it's kind of an LS specific thing for these cars. I don't know if it's for like a swirl pod or something like that, but I do still have a lot of things to do. Essentially what I need to do is, you're seeing this shiny joint that's down in there. I need to take that out because that is actually causing a lot of problems. So I need to get from the rag joint forward. Right now I have this unplugged simply because it's like a low fluid indicator. And what happened was, just through pulling everything back and forth several times, is I got a split in that wire. That's really, really common. So probably what I'll do is I'll pigtail this off and just find another plug on another car and use it instead. Another thing that I'm going to look at is my grounds, just to make sure that some of the misfiring's not because the coil packs aren't igniting properly due to a ground. The other thing is, this is probably what's actually going to go ahead and go at the bottom of the rack. I'm trying to decide specifically how I want to mount it. What I may end up doing is just taking the rogue lower section and welding it into a 300ZX top section. So that way it's the correct length, and what I'll end up doing is, whenever I do that, you guys can kind of see I have my fuel lines that are just right here. And then this right here that you can just barely see is actually an exhaust, a piece of exhaust for one of the back cylinders. So what I'll probably do is go ahead and chop that, run my steering how I kind of wanted to do it previously, and then just have the exhaust actually come out further. Because one of the things that I have is I have some Titan manifolds. And the Titan manifolds are really similar, but they have a different plate, and then they splay out really far to go around a very large 5-speed automatic transmission. So I can actually scavenge some parts off of that if I want to just do a very rough weld job around that. But, you know, shame on me for basically adding too many joints. I didn't even think about it at the time, and I added way too many joints. I do have a pipe to go here. The problem is I don't have enough couplers. So as soon as I get those couplers in, I'll go ahead and probably end up showing how to do that, because that's something that's very simple that even somebody who's very basically mechanically inclined would be able to do that. This, I had talked about needing a bracket for my cable here, my throttle cable, and this is actually made by Excessive. It's really great. You can actually adjust it quite a bit if you need to. I've got it kind of adjusted all the way back, but if I did get a different throttle cable out of a different car, which would be pretty easy to do, there's a lot of junkyards around here, one that's shorter, I can actually go ahead and play with that until I got just the right length. Other than that, I mean, this is the first time that this car has, in any form or fashion, pardon the mess, had a rear bumper on this freaking car. And as you can see, I've got some pretty nice stainless steel mufflers that I managed to pick up, and a reasonably nice mid-pipe. It's not great, but it's just kind of a hacked together system, so to speak, that I put together, and most of it's just, you know, $150 worth of parts essentially. And I have one downpipe that is completely done. It could be a little bit more elegant. If you guys want to actually see in there, it's all put together. I actually need to take the cluster out one more time and just make sure that everything is hooked up correctly, because I'm having an issue where I have an oil pressure gauge that's sort of ohming out at times, and I think that's because I have two plugs switched. Not necessarily on the wiring harness down there, but actually on the back of the gauge cluster. I think I have two of them out of order. So that's something that I'm also going to check on. And really, I guess that's pretty much it. It's, you know, it's a pretty rough car. It was $1,000. It didn't always look like this, but it wasn't a front end collision whenever I got it. It is Nissan Super White, but I'm making it a little bit brighter, as you can see by the engine bay. This is just like an Arctic white, I guess you could say. Now, I'm still getting a lot of questions about these fuel rails. Once again, this is Eric at Performance VH's fuel rail kit. However, I did make my own custom brackets for this. These are just sheet metal for now, just long enough to where I knew that they would seat with the injectors. Another thing that I had to do, I could have ground the rails a little bit, but instead I just decided to cut some of these little ears off. The upper intake manifold does attach just fine without that all fixed, but it's just something to think about, that, you know, you are going to have to kind of modify it a little bit if you do the top feeds. And I had talked before about these injector bosses. Now, this bright shiny piece right here is the injector boss. Those essentially use like a 3/4 inch drill bit, and you drill a hole into the lower intake pieces. So once you drill that in there, the injector bosses just slide right in. And then I used JB Weld essentially because I didn't really feel like taking it someplace and spending $150 to have somebody TIG weld them, or possibly $200, because it is time consuming to do each one. So because it doesn't get a whole lot of heat where it's at, and I really just needed it to seal very well and not move around at all, I just went ahead and used JB Weld, and it actually works quite fantastic. I'm very pleased with the way that today's epoxies are really turning out. But that's it for now. I mean, only thing that I'm trying to do is just sort through all these little problems, and I don't have any fuel leaks. I do have a stock fuel pump right now, just a stock NA fuel pump. It's producing more than enough pressure, but I am noticing, especially without the engine burning properly, if I push the pressure up a little bit more towards 50, the fuel pump runs a heck of a lot more in order to keep the system pressurized. So that's going to be something that I'll really have to watch, especially on throttle application. But a really easy swap is just to put a twin turbo fuel pump in here. And once again, I'll say it, I've said it once, I've said it a million times, this is just an NA transmission in this car. There's no need to go out and get a twin turbo transmission. The NA transmission is just as good for this motor setup as what a twin turbo is. The twin turbo is actually not any more stout you're actually maybe a little bit more limited at times with your clutch selection, because the NA bell housing size and flywheel size is shared with some of the more common Skyline GTS, I think it's the GTS transmissions. So that's just something to think about, that you can go the twin turbo route if you already have a car that's a twin turbo and you're putting a VH45 engine in it. I would just use what you have. It's not going to hurt it at all, but do keep in mind, you know, I had talked in a previous video about the starter and the starter location. There are two locations. The VH45 starter is actually motor side. The 300ZX is on the side of the transmission. What's going to happen is if you have a twin turbo, that transmission bell housing is slightly larger by just a small amount, and there's actually like a little spacer on the actual starter itself. So that could have issues if you're running stock manifolds like what I am. So in that case, I would actually consider seeing if I could run the stock Q45 starter instead of this. It should work the same way, but I don't know because I didn't do that. I just cut the ears off. Gonna make a little dust plate essentially to keep debris from getting in there when I do like track days and stuff like that. But for the most part, I just used what I had. You know, I wanted to use as much 300ZX stuff as I possibly could. And then everything that I touched that was VH45, I essentially went the extra mile to try to make it easier to swap things, easier to swap injectors. Once again, the injectors are Fast branded by, they're sold at Summit Racing, and they're 39 pounders. Nothing too crazy over what stock is. I just could not find one that was just exactly the same as stock. So I went ahead and got those 39 pounders, and those are actually LS7 injectors. That's why they're so short. So everything fits pretty well. It still needs a lot of work, but if you guys have anything that you're interested in seeing, go ahead and leave it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, guys.